We recognize that CVUUS gathers on land seized from the Western Abenaki people by European colonizers. We respect the Abenaki's spiritual relationship to the land and waters of the Champlain Valley. We are committed to building a peaceful and more just relationship with them and to promoting knowledge about their history and culture. Good morning. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. January 1st, New Year's Day. Doesn't look much like January out there. You walk by the shovels and the snow melt and it's 50 degrees, but it is. And the seasons, they go round and round. And for me, they seem to go like this, round and round. Didn't we just do this? Lickety-split. And the painted ponies go up and down. Thank goodness for those painted ponies. We are, dear souls, captive indeed on the carousel of time. Whether the new year represents to you a new beginning or an end of something, or both, a light at the end of the tunnel perhaps, or a time to be entered with trepidation, it's good that you are here with us in this sanctuary today, a sanctuary indeed. A faith community based on love, a home for your spirit. You are welcome here. Whether you're a member, a regular, a newcomer, perhaps participating in the service remotely, hello, Anne. You are among friends, and you are welcome here. This is no cavalcade of despair. I'm Carl Lindholm, a member of the worship team, and I'm assisting today our minister, Barnaby Feeder. Be a good time to turn off your phone if you haven't already. If you're visiting, please sign the guest book in the foyer so we can send you information about all of our activities. And do stay after the service for snacks and friendly conversation downstairs in the Ann Ross Fellowship Room. Now let us worship together. Ours is also no cavalcade of despair. I asked Brett if she knew of a poem that might be suitable for worship on this day of such powerful symbolism, and she did, suggesting the poem January 1 by the Nobel Prize-winning Mexican poet Octavio Paz, as translated by the great American poet Elizabeth Bishop. I've excerpted 3 stanzas and would encourage you to read the whole poem, January 1st. The year's doors open like those of language toward the unknown. Last night you told me, tomorrow we shall have to think up signs, sketch a landscape, fabricate a plan on the double page of day and paper. Tomorrow we shall have to invent once more the reality of this world. I opened my eyes late. For a second I felt what the Aztec felt on the crest of the promontory, lying in wait for the time's uncertain return through cracks in the horizon. When you open your eyes, we'll walk once more among the hours and their inventions. We'll walk among appearances and bear witness to time and its conjugations. Perhaps we'll open the day's doors, and then we shall enter the unknown. Octavio Paz. Now, as Barnaby lights the chalice, please repeat with me the words in your order of service or on the screen. We kindle this flame in gratitude for the blessing of gathering freely in this sanctuary, for the nourishment of memory, caring, wisdom, accountability, and hope. Now we have two readings today. And the first is the poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay, To Jesus on His Birthday. It's number 620, but I'll read it. It's in our hymnal. To Jesus on His birthday. For this, your mother sweated in the cold. For this, you bled upon the bitter tree, a yard of tinsel ribbon bought and sold, a paper wreath, a day at home for me. The merry bells ring out, the people kneel, up goes the preacher before the crowd, with voice of honey and eyes of steel, droning your humble gospel to the proud. Nobody listens. Less than the wind that blows are all of your words to us, you died to save. O Prince of Peace, O Sharon's dewy rose, how mute you lie within your vaulted grave. The stone the angel rolled away with tears is back upon your mouth these 1,000 years.
Thank you, Carl, for that sort of bleak view of what Christmas is all about. And here's another aspect of that, actually from the Bible itself. A lot of you are familiar with the story of the three wise men, but some of you aren't, so I'm just going to set a little bit of background. They came from the east to worship the baby Jesus. First, they go to Jerusalem because they don't know exactly where Jesus is, and they encounter the ruler, Herod the Great. Herod has been in office for 35 years. He is Jewish, but he rules Israel on behalf of Rome, and he's there to keep the peace and to stay in power. And he says to them, oh, I've heard about this Jewish baby being born, the new king. I want to worship him too. When you find him, come back and tell me all about it so I can go worship him too. The wise men go off to worship Jesus, and they're warned by an angel not to go back to Herod, and they go home without ever going back. Herod still doesn't know where the baby is. He's infuriated, and this is what happened. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. So, I'm going to speak to you directly this morning. No reading of notes. This is not because I'm being unusually brave. It's because the year began with a computer glitch which prevented me printing out anything that I had written in preparation for this service. But this is something I have been thinking about for a long time, so I don't think I'm going to miss much of the message, just a few of the quotes I was going to intersperse to support my message. As some of you know, quite a few years ago when I led Christmas Eve service at CVUUS, I leaned heavily into this portion of Matthew, sometimes called the Massacre of Innocents, because I felt it was an important part of the Christmas story. And I got my head handed to me by a fair number of people in the congregation who said, that's not what we come to Christmas Eve for. We want the story of the baby in the manger. We want to sing some Christmas carols. And I've respected that ever since. I don't do much of the Matthew story. Sometimes I stick in a little bit of a reminder that the shepherds who in Luke go to worship Jesus are not likely to be alive when he actually starts preaching. And that's sort of an interesting message to be part of the story. But every time I bring that up with a Christian minister, they have never, ever thought about that. So apparently, the shepherds are part of the story in a way that anybody who heard it originally would realize was unlikely given their lifespan. So for years since then, I've been struggling because one of the reasons you called me was to make what we sometimes call, to make this space a brave space, to talk about difficult things, to challenge you. And so I always felt that I wasn't doing the Christmas story justice by leaving that out. That the story is so different without that portion of it that it's not really a true story in the sense of really mapping to human existence that most of us can relate to, where bad things happen as well. So this year I'm experimenting with getting back to the part that I had to leave out on January 1st and sort of wrapping up the Christmas season with looking forward to the year with the whole story of Christmas on our minds. But I felt I was going to flip the service and do this right at the beginning, and it was going to be there, and then we could move on to something more open-ended, forward-looking, joyful, and have all of that experience all in this one service. We'll see how it goes. The first thing I wanted to make as a point about the dark side of Christmas is that Unitarians are partly responsible for the disappearance of a lot of this emphasis. The Puritans didn't celebrate Christmas at all. They felt it was just a disguised reason for partying, descended from pagan days, and they wanted no part of it. After people had been in New England for over a century and a half, they started saying, no, we want the party. And the reformers in the church started saying, we should be celebrating the birth of our Savior. And the Unitarians hit on the idea that the reason to celebrate it is it's a great opportunity for teaching children that important idea of generosity. The story talks about poor people, and this is a time to remind ourselves to be generous, and it's never too early to start doing that with our children. And so the idea of presents and feeding the hungry was popularized by the liberal wing of the Puritan Church, which later became Unitarians. And out of that, the British Unitarian Charles Dickens wrote the Christmas Carol story, which also deals with that. The Unitarians brought the Christmas tree from Germany into this country. It's a Unitarian minister in Lexington who was German, who played a big role in that. And gradually, a lot of this holiday spirit that we came to celebrate seeped into the culture and began replacing more and more some real consideration of the whole story being pretty hard right from the beginning. God comes into the world not in a way that's calculated to make a big splash. I mean, if God could make any choice, God could choose to be born into a wealthy family with real access to kingly power right from the beginning. God wouldn't be born to a family that's refugees, basically, and can't find a place to stay, and is only made visible to the lowest rung of society, the shepherds. And on and on and on. And by the way, the wise men give him 3 gifts, one of which is the gift traditionally given for anointing the dead. That's not pointing to a really bright future. Another is the gift given for priests who used it in sacrifices in the temple. Again, a little bit of a troubling image. And if you really start parsing the gifts, gold is usually viewed as a symbol of wealth and power. But actually, the first two gifts, frankincense and myrrh, come from a corner of Arabia, and they're harvested from trees as bark or sap and boiled down to whatever they're going to use. This is sort of the maple syrup version of Christmas. And gold could be referred to as the most valuable form of these items taken from these trees, rather than literal gold. They could have all three been different substances that are used in seasoning or scenting the world. So just like the darkest maple syrup, that's gold. So there's a lot of different ways to look at these stories, but just in case you didn't get the message that the world that these people were born into was hard, and the world that Jesus chooses to be born into, to the degree you subscribe to the idea that this is God's plan, is the world that is really on the outside, and is a world that is going to be a world of trouble for Jesus himself. A complete overthrow of traditional ideas of what a new king would be born into. So it's pretty radical. And when you start taking the hard parts out of it and the bitter parts out of it, you start basically taking the guts of the story out of it. You start taking the idea that this promise is so important that it's going to come into the world, it's going to survive this rough upbringing, it's going to survive the death of the prophet, it's going to come into being a generation or two generations after the death of the prophet, only through word of mouth. The prophet is not even going to be attested to by the greatest historians of his day. It's kind of ironic because Herod was profiled by Josephus, the most prolific historian of his day. There are two books written about Herod, and he was referred to by other people as well, almost more than the Roman emperor. He could have been the best documented person of his time. And there's no record of Jesus outside the Bible. Now, a lot of people have said this is a good indication that Jesus is just a myth that people made up. And scholars and scientists will tell you that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And there's some good reasons, logical reasons, why Jesus might not have appeared in Josephus. And the most interesting one is that if the worst part of this, from the point of view of looking at what happened, the massacre of the children, actually happened, you have to think about the situation. Bethlehem was a very small town. If you take all of the children within 2 years of age, and you figure that half of them are girls, that's maybe 12 to 15 boys would have been killed in Bethlehem and its immediate vicinity, in an era where children died all the time, and more importantly, in an era where Herod did some things that were much, much worse. He killed 3 of his own sons. He had 10 wives, and the family was always fighting for power within it. He killed 3 of his own sons, he killed other relatives, just to try to keep a lid on all the power struggles. And as he was dying, realizing he wasn't going to be missed, this is 4 years after the reported birth of Jesus, Herod rounds up tells his sister Salome to round up all the Jewish leaders in this beautiful hippodrome he's built below his summer palace, and when he dies, to kill them. And he really wants Jews to have something to cry about when he dies, because otherwise he's not going to be mourned. Sweet guy, Herod. So as one scholar said, is this the kind of guy who could have ordered killing of the babies in Bethlehem? Yeah, but given everything else that was going on in his life, is it surprising that Josephus doesn't mention this little incident in Bethlehem, which he might not even have heard about, compared to all these other things when he's talking about how bad Herod is? And so you've got all of these different aspects of how the story was both terrible and yet so confined in space and time that it was almost unremarkable in its time. And I think it tells you a lot about how horror enters our lives. Yes, there's the Holocaust, but then there are also these anti-Semitic shootings here and there in which just a few people are killed to our horror in places that we don't expect it. There are always these tragedies that in some sense are even harder on us because they happen in Uvalde and places where everybody's always interviewed saying, we didn't expect this here. If we don't tell this Christmas story as related to the world we really live in, then we really are saying this is just an occasion for joy, for being with family, not to gainsay those things, but it's not something that challenges us to think about how we live. And it's not something that really, in the end, gives us power, because out of all of these improbabilities, out of all this suffering, out of all this horror, after all these multiple ways you can tell that story, somehow something very powerful catches fire and emerges and changes the world in many ways for the better, in many ways for the worse, but undeniably changes the world. So what does that tell us about the importance of who we are in any given moment in a world where we can change things? It makes Christmas a story for our times and a story for us to say, all right, I have the power to choose to bless the world, and for better or worse, I'm going to put my power there. So that's what I wanted to say to you today. I want this to be a brave space. I want us to realize by being together in this space and facing the world the way it is and deciding to do good things together and counting on each other in all of our imperfect ways to work on what we love, the gist of what was my weekend greeting message, which I hope some of you have had a chance to look at. I think Christmas can be something that Unitarians and Universalists not only want to celebrate, but need to celebrate for many, many years to come. And I hope that happens. I hope that we don't let our well-placed love of the solstice allow us to use that as an excuse to stop paying attention to Christmas. That will be the job of the interim and the next minister to keep you on the path there. But I hope whoever you chooses sees the value in taking these old stories and looking closely at them for what they can really mean for us. I think there's a lot there for us to keep alive. And it said sermon, but I was not intending to talk at sermon length. I meant to be a homily, and there it is. I think the good part of this all starts with something very simple, which is paying enough attention to each other to understand what's on our minds. So let's come sing a song with me, which talks about that. Not about changing each other's minds, but seeing each other's minds. I think that's where all good things start. And I'm pegging it to the milestones and meditation section of the service today because I think that one of the ways we miss out on all of our pathways to connection is we don't stop to think about how much it would mean to us to get together with somebody to do something during the week. It can be something that's a service to the church, or it can just be having coffee or tea. But it's this fellowship when we're outside of the service that has a lot to do with knowing what's on each other's mind. So when we print in the order of service or in our newsletters, things you can do, things you can volunteer with, those are all ways of being together in fellowship that happen to also do something to sustain the congregation or to make us a bigger presence in the community. And today, rather than mentioning anything specific that's coming up, I want to mention that each week there are unmentioned pathways to connection. And I'll just give you an example. If you're walking into a service at the church after a big storm and you see a lot of branches down, there is nothing to stop you at the end of coffee hour from saying to 2 or 3 people, hey, let's move a couple of these branches away. You've done something together. It's a pathway to connection. If you're in the choir and you know of an upcoming song, and you know someone in the congregation who likes singing and they're not in the choir, you can just say to them, hey, Ronnie's really a great guy. He'd welcome you joining the choir for one service. If you really want to sing this song, you should come to choir practice this week, Thursday, and sing with us the following Sunday. Pathway to connection. It's never going to show up in the service, in the order of service that way, and we aren't going to make an announcement. But you guys are brilliant. You're loving, you're smart. Just think about all the unsaid things as just as important as the ones that we're announcing. That's my pathways for connection for today. Now, milestones. I want to call your attention to something that I didn't know about till I read the Addison Independent yesterday, but Charlie CVUUS, who was a member of our congregation for quite a few years early in my tenure, but not a long time member for decades and decades, he died on the 21st. And there will be a memorial service for him, according to what was in the paper, sometime in May. So we'll try and keep our eye open for that and let those of you who knew Charlie who would like to go to his memorial service know about that, because the congregation is a lot bigger than the people who are in the directory right now. It's people who've passed through, who've had their lives changed, who've changed our lives one way or another. And Charlie, who was a longtime high school teacher here and then a poet a lot of the time in this congregation, often ushered, is one of those people in my mind. I want to share with you, because a lot of you know that my sister has a very serious uterine cancer and had the operation this week, which was to show them what she actually had. Came out of the operation, they found a lot less cancer than they expected. So she still has the cancer, she still has a long battle ahead of her, but it's a very good sign, so it made for a happy new year for us. And I don't normally share a milestone that I don't have permission to share, but I have one I want to share that I'm going to just disguise who it is to make it possible for me to share. This is a friend, someone who's not a part of the congregation. They've been fostering a child for 2 years. The child was from a very, very dysfunctional family situation. As the 2 years went along, they began hoping that they would be able to adopt the child. And I just learned this week that the 2 parents who are separated finally both agreed to let them go ahead with the adoption, and that will be happening. All the paperwork and everything will be happening with the start of the new year. The world is filled with all kinds of stories of wonderful people stepping up to fill needs, and sometimes it's just great for us to be able to share them as milestones in our lives, even if they aren't part of our congregation. They change the air that we bring into this space, and I wanted to share that with you. Each week there's unspoken milestones, and people either don't give me a yellow card, or they give it to me so early in the week I forget it, or it occurs to them as they're listening to this. We leave time in every service for people to look into their hearts about the milestones in their lives, both happy and sad, in silence, in prayer, or in meditation. And that time is now. I invite you to come out of this time with, Ronnie's going to sing a hymn, The Dark of Winter. It's number 55 in the Great Hymnal. I'm not going to invite you to get up and sing it and participate as a hymn. You can just listen to Ronnie singing it to you, or read along if you want. But I don't necessarily mean this to be something that you have to focus on being able to read the words and singing along, unless you want to.
Soft and still, your quiet calm surrounds me. Let my thoughts go where they will, ease my mind profoundly, and then my soul will sing a song
So one of the things that I've done over the years as a minister here, maybe a penance for my long previous career in journalism, is that I have had at least one Sunday during the year when I let you ask me any question, as if it was a press conference, since I had so often been on the other side. And so that's what is going to happen here. Carl, we should have an extra mic for you to carry around. So if you have a question for me, just raise your hand. Carl will bring you the mic. It's not because we don't think we could hear you in the room, but we want to be friendly to the people on Zoom and let them hear too.
Yes, and Carl needs some exercise.
And say your name for people who might not know you yet.
Okay. Hi, Neely Jennings. Is it spiritual questions or just any?
Any questions.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, this is sort of
if
spiritual.
it's not, shouldn't be like a book I forgot to return to you or something like that.
What did you have for breakfast? No. My question is, I've been thinking about this because my cousin's father recently passed away, and he was like a emotionally abusive, kind of neglectful dad, but still their dad, still a part of their lives. So the question is, how do you grieve someone like Herod, someone like that who, like, you're not, I don't know, I have trouble conjuring any feeling at all about it, you know? So that's my question.
This is a question that everybody in a congregation has in one way or another. Some of us, unfortunately, have it much, much harder, and I try to keep that in mind. You mentioned Herod. Herod actually stayed in power for 40 years because he did a lot of things that a lot of people thought were wonderful, too. He built port cities, he built all these facilities, he managed to keep the Romans from paying much attention by keeping things under control, which from the point of view of a lot of people in Israel was a good thing. So even people who've done things that we don't like, we know that in their lives they've done other things that we could admire. Maybe they didn't even do them willingly, but they did them. And so that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that you don't owe feelings to anyone. If you don't feel great about them, you just let that be, and you feel grateful for the relief of the people who are more in the line of fire and unprotected. That in and of itself is a blessing. And I guess the third aspect of it that I've learned more and more as a minister, but I think most of us learn in different ways, is that it's kind of a mistake to think of someone as abusive as if that's who they are, their identity. They are a person who does a lot of abusive things, and there's usually a lot in their background that they didn't have control over that's made them that way. And maybe you don't grieve them, but you grieve what happened to them that led them into that life. The Universalists in the 19th century, when they had this radical doctrine that everybody ends up in heaven, and people would say, but these people are so evil, how can that be the place of the world? They would say that the hell that those people had was what they missed in their opportunities to be connected to God while they were alive, and that there was no afterlife punishment that was worse than that. And so you can ask yourself, what did that person miss by being that, and know that they've spent a lot of their life in a certain kind of hell even while they were making it for others, if you want to be a good 19th century Universalist. I think it's a great question. We could talk forever about it, but I'm going to leave it there.
I was just wondering, as you're facing retirement.
And you are.
Oh, I'm Janice Sabat. I was just wondering, as you're, facing your last of your time here, if you look back and think, if only I would have, or I wish I would have done more of. In a concise answer.
It's funny. I think I'm more likely to look back and think, if only I had done less of. I think some of the things that I've served the congregation most poorly on is trying to do too much, trying to stuff too much into a sermon, trying to see too many people and not spending enough time with a few people who really needed it. I mean, I'm sure that there are things I wish I had done more of as well. But I tend to be forgiving of myself in that regard because I know there's only 24 hours in the day. And if I think that I'm spending them mostly pretty well, I just realize there's an opportunity cost to it, and I try not to focus on what I didn't get. But when you're doing a lot of things, you're going to also make a lot of mistakes. So I sort of more regret the things that I did too much of than the things I didn't do enough of. But that's just the way I'm wired.
I want to speak to the one thing I think you did very, very well, and from the very beginning of your time here. It has to do with the memorial services. And I remember you had one from a good friend of mine I knew very well. You didn't know him at all. And you did such a wonderful, sort of sensitive presentation of him. And my question was, how do you do that? Because it's been more than one time.
Well, sort of a truism, you know, you do things well that you love doing. I think the end of life, there's always so much that's fascinating about people that gets crystallized then. And it's the time when the history becomes a story and you pick out the parts that are most meaningful to the people who love them. What job could be better than picking out what's most meaningful to a group of people who loved someone? And I'm always aware that the audience at a memorial service is going to fill in everything that you'll just have to hint at it. And if it's important and it makes them happy, they'll fill it in for you. So it's like having a journalist and writing a story that you know everybody's going to read it in the most positive way. And that's kind of a very reassuring thing. Actually, one of my favorite things to do as a journalist was obituaries. I just think that there's something so spiritually beautiful about a completed life. So I've always welcomed the opportunity to do the memorial services. And I find that families tend to cooperate a lot better about a memorial service than they do, for instance, a wedding. And I'm not alone. Most ministers would much rather do a memorial service than a wedding. Yes, you have Hillary.
Hillary Hatch. I'm a new member, and when I first set foot in this sanctuary towards the beginning of this year, I've never been a church member, but this felt like home, and always has now. I am a late night person. I'm an owl, and I'm also a person who cannot imagine life without humor. So I am a good friend via TV with Stephen Colbert, who's a late night host of a fascinating show. And he has a series of questions that he will ask of various people who have been his guests, which are posed to reveal who they are. And most of them are not serious. But it's interesting to know. So I'm going to ask you very few of those questions.
Okay.
Your favorite sandwich?
Well, the one with the deepest roots that's utterly reliable that I know I can eat any time in any situation and feel fed is peanut butter and jelly. I don't know if that makes it my favorite, but it's my go-to in a crunch.
Apples or oranges?
Apples.
Good choice. Um, Cats or dogs?
I'm a dog person.
Okay.
I live with a cat person, happily.
If you had to listen to one song or piece of music for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh, guess it would have to be something really long with lots of variation. um, that one, it's different songs for different moments. I can't get myself out of the reality of what my choices are far enough to answer that.
Okay, what you said makes me think of Rachmaninoff Variations on a Theme by Paganini. Think about that one, or listen to it.
I view that as, I was thinking that would be a piece of music. That's not a song. I thought you were thinking of something with words.
But you indicated it had to be a piece of music.
Yeah, okay.
You got one now?
No, I've gone through variations there where I could listen over and over to something and then you reach the end of it. And I think to be alive is to have the opportunity for that next new thing and to be open to it. So I would be sort of anti my theology, actually, to say I'm going to do that.
2 more questions. What do you think happens after death?
I think people remember you, and then the people they know get a little bit influenced, and after a while you aren't remembered, but you're still rippling through the universe in a way. So once you've won the lottery to be born, you're eternal in that sense.
Last thing, sum up your life in 5 words. You asked for this.
Yeah. Well, if I was really being honest, I would not obey the rules. That sums up my life. And add extra words. But
That's perfect.
so far, I would say, so far, so good. Thanks.
It's okay, Barnaby. Don't think twice. It's all right.
Anne.
Ann Webster. I'm not sure I'll be able to articulate my question very well, so I hope it's understandable. Something that I feel very conflicted about, and I feel creates a lot of problems, and your sermon sort of spoke to today, is just poverty. And we see an ever widening gap, and we see many new people entering the realm of being impoverished. And UU congregations historically have been made up with a lot of people who are well educated, and maybe many don't struggle as much. And it feels like we try to do a lot in terms of giving, and the holidays just reinforce that disparity between those who have and those who don't. And we do a lot of giving and community suppers and our Radical Love raffles and focus a lot on giving. And I'm just kind of wondering, as a UU minister, if a congregant or anyone new comes to you and their major problem in life is poverty and struggling, what kind of counsel or advice? I don't even really mean advice in terms of telling people what to do, but what would be that UU sort of connection to help them improve their life?
I, I love that question, in part because this is not a new issue, actually. The Unitarians in Boston were the first to ever create a separate ministry, not attached to a parish, simply dedicated to dealing with the city's poor people. Novel concept at the time. So it's been on folks' minds. And I think, well, first of all, it's not to make assumptions that you really understand what the real nature of their poverty is. Sometimes it's obvious. Gandhi once said to a starving person, God can only appear as a loaf of bread, or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. So yes, you have to take care of basic shelter and food. And in our society, I think we are capable of doing that if a person comes to us. It's when a huge number of people come to us, and the problem is, to be honest, beyond any individual's capacity to really comprehend what's the best thing to do, that we start feeling helpless and floundering. But poverty is always interrelated with a lot of other issues. Just as a real life answer, if I'm dealing with someone who's impoverished, in part because they're so mentally unstable that they can't gain access to and use the socially available resources regularly, and they need help with that, that's a very different person than a person who's impoverished because they've never had enough employment to build up resources, and they've got a big family and they're trying to keep too many people afloat. But they have all their wits and they know what's out there. They're just systemically poor because society is constructed to keep a lot of people poor. And so I think the first thing you have to do is not, if you're blessed with having to deal with just an individual rather than a whole society, is to not lose sight that they're an individual. And they may not even tell you right at the beginning what the real sources of their poverty is or are. So you need to be in touch and watch it develop and respond iteratively. And to know that in the end, it's not given to any of us to make the perfect decisions. So you try to do your best and just not forget that you also are an individual with your needs. You don't want to fall into the classic person who ignores their own kids and their family to serve others in a way that is very public and visible and may bring you glory, but it's not really fulfilling your responsibilities to other people that you've taken on. So it's, there is no answer. There's just a bunch of directions that can help you feel like you're trying to do your best. Is the way I would put it. But we do, also we have to not be guilty of having too narrow a view. Nick Kristof just wrote about this. Worldwide, the number of people being lifted out of poverty is at a record number, depending on how you define poverty. So there is a lot of redistribution of wealth going on, not enough. But if you look at the course of human history, there are some positive things going on. And you look at the Ukraine that's being destroyed today, and that Ukraine was far, far wealthier than the Ukraine 100 years ago for most people. So, you know, a whole history of progress, you know, being destroyed. We do both. But we shouldn't lose sight of the progress we've made. And not say that's enough. And anybody else who hasn't, is there anybody online? Okay. At the back.
Hi, Pam Tingaris. That was a really interesting, thought-provoking question, especially in the context of everything. My question is kind of related, but a little bit different. I was wondering if maybe you could speak to the poverty of attendance after Christmas versus the abundance that we saw in attendance, kind of along the lines of, post-holiday darkness that comes in, and just your thoughts in general on that.
This is the kind of question that ministers will drive themselves crazy with, in part because there's no answer. A January 1st service that falls on a Sunday is different than a January 4th service that falls on a Sunday, and people are traveling. I think that attendance is down some because there's still a lot of catch-up travel from COVID, and then there are people who have illnesses who aren't coming out still, particularly families, to church. And so ministers talk about this a lot because attendance is down most places. And I think it's you serve the people who are there, you have faith that the people who aren't there have reasons that are important to them, and I just think of the words of one of our congregants who said, I'm not coming back. Not back yet, but don't put me on the list of people who are not coming back. And so I think we just have to have faith that it will work out. And meanwhile, new people will find us. New people have found us. I need to stop the questions here. I do want to share, normally we're long past the offering, but I saved the offering for the end. This congregation started a tradition of one Sunday a year surprising another new UU congregation, the newest UU congregation, with a donation. They're sharing our offering with them. We're a young congregation, founded in 1986. First meeting was in the Birninghausen's living room. Thank you, John, for being here today. And look at just this short time, how far we've come. So we get this new congregation and we say, we hope that you have the joy and the growth that this congregation has managed. And there are other people out here cheering for you. So we've been doing this for a number of years, and it's always been some small fellowship in Florida, or was one in Arkansas, and then in rural Wisconsin, there was this group of people who split off from an existing church to form a new congregation. And I got in touch with the UUA this year, and they said the newest congregation of the UUA is New Brackets Church, Peaks Island, Maine. But this is actually a 180-year-old congregation, and it has an amazing story. They were Methodist for most of their history. Peaks Island is in Casco Bay, just off the coast of Portland. In fact, technically, it's part of the city of Portland, Maine. Kids go to school in the city after elementary school, things like that. So it's a stable population that's been there, and they were Methodist, though, the whole of their existence. And the Methodists, as some of you know, have been very anti-LGBTQ rights at the denominational level. They didn't recognize same-sex marriages. They didn't want openly gay people as ministers, and it's been a continual battle. The majority of the Methodist Church in the United States now is more accepting, but they've been so successful as evangelists, unlike us, that they have huge Methodist populations in Korea and Africa who have votes on these things, and they tend to be more conservative, so they're actually headed towards a schism in the church. But this particular congregation is one of many that took the invitation to disaffiliate over this issue, and they said, well, if you're not going down the path towards accepting all people, we're not going to be Methodists. And they disaffiliated in 2016, and they took a year of study, and then they decided to try and affiliate jointly with the United Church of Christ and the Unitarian Universalists. And so they joined both of those denominations officially in 2021. And the name reflects a rich family on the island that supported the church in the 19th century, and they're thinking about changing the name. But because it's associated with different ways that money was accumulated, that they don't necessarily want associated with the congregation. But the minister who I spoke to, Will Green, who is a gay man, said that they thought they were going to quickly make a decision to get rid of the old name. Now they're going to take at least a year, he thinks, to talk about all the implications of it and what a new name would be and what is a name that they want to live into. So this is a congregation. I said, well, what's exciting? What is being affiliated with the UUA doing for you? And he said, the most amazing thing is we have never been in an environment where the congregation owned the church. You know, everything came down from a high, and people here are just so excited about the role of democracy in the life of the church now. And they actually have been growing because they're attracting people on the island now. And it's just a very different kind of new congregation for us to support. And I think in this time when so much is uncertain, it's very exciting. So I'm going to invite everybody to be as generous as they can today. And if they prefer to give online, to do that during the week, or to use the QR code. But I'd love to be able to send a nice little offering to New Bracket. And Will, he was just beside himself to hear this out of the blue thing. He thought this was so great, and he was so excited to feel that here they are new, and there's already Unitarian Universalist congregations aware they exist, and we're rooting for them. Yeah, we're passing these baskets. If someone wants to get up out of their seat, you could also leave something here. Thank you. Let's sing From You I Receive, but not sing the last hymn. There shouldn't be a rule that the smaller the congregation, the longer the service. So just invite you to stand, and we'll receive the offering with this, and then I'll give a benediction. And normally I speak my benediction from whatever's on my heart in the room at the end of the service, but instead I'm just going to read the last verse of the hymn we're not singing. The ceaseless flow of endless time. The past and future ever meet in the eternal now. To make each day a thing complete shall be our New Year's vow. Blessed be and amen.